These rocks, and it's been really an interesting process over the past year, gathering this group, trying to get an idea of sort of what we see as some of the issues I think we can focus on to help encourage sustainable economic growth. And I think one of the things that has been touched on is the fact that there are so many great resources, great people working in this community with great ideas, that part of our vision is to simply bring people together and discover the resources that we have, the ideas that we have, and start with that. So it's great to have folks here tonight to share in this process as we continue our strategic planning for the year and what sort of events we could focus on, what kind of dialogue we could have through these monthly meetings. So what we'd like to do is go through and give folks here tonight a chance to get out and just share a little bit about what they see as their wild idea or great idea for what we can do towards economic development. And we're going to focus on sharing those ideas. We'll be grouping these in a way that we can have some input later on if there's particular ideas that you say, wow, we get involved with that or talk about that. You know, a great speaker that can help we can bring to town to educate more on that. So we'll have an opportunity to get some more input from everyone on these various topics. So right now we'd like to focus on listening as folks get up and share the ideas. So this part is not so much a discussion, it's just really listening and hearing each other and what we have to share about how we see economic development and what some of the priorities are to work on. So I am going to start here on the list at the top with Valerie Robertson. All right, and I'll ask you to maybe just pick one of your, we captured up to 5 of your ideas, but I'll ask you to just share maybe one that you feel like is really important that you'd like to share.
Okay. Well, I have 2 actually. One, planning ahead just seems to be something we don't collectively do. It's an easy concept. It's a basic business concept. And I really think that if we buy into that and have cooperative discussion up front, that we couldn't help but benefit. And something I didn't write on my sheet, but sitting in this room I can't help but think of it. I did move here because of the arts, indirectly. I am one of the people who came to town because there was a public radio station. And I was shopping for a place to live that I assumed would be west of Mississippi and that would be in the suburbs of some really large metropolitan area, because I've lived in Washington, D.C. and Geneva, Switzerland, and I bore easily. I have to have cultural people around me. I have to have stimulation or I can't settle. And when I got to Wilmington, there's a higher percentage of people involved, seriously involved in meaningful cultural activity per capita than I'm accustomed to finding. And so I want a house instead. And so the environment and the arts are just critically important to attract people here. And I'd like us to continue to keep that in mind as this new obviously has respect and expertise.
Thank you, Valerie. I'm going to call on one of our board members, Bill Graham.
Pulling one out of my hat, I have proposed to anyone who would listen that we combine 2 very important resources in this town for what I think would be a salutary benefit for all activities. And that specifically would be the addition to an existing plan of an additional resource. Let me explain. We have a plan for multimedia, multi-mode transportation center, MMTC. It's to go on 3rd Street. It's a very exciting development. The state has been responsible for the primary funding, about 90%, and the city for the remaining 10%. So they've got a stake in the game. All of the physical structures are either purchased or under contract, as I understand it. So there's an entire block, if you know where the U-Haul building is, that's a prominent piece of that entire block. And it butts up against that depressed area that used to be where a trolley line Titusville Beach. And further out, you'll find it ties into the bike trails and walking trails. So it has an interesting positioning. And when we think about multimodal transportation, one can also think about visitors arriving in town and coming to a single place where they can intersect all of this, leave their cars if they choose to do so, get into a trolley, a bus, a cab, and maybe eventually some train connections, light rail, and so forth. There's serious, at least planning effort going on for the possibility of reestablishing a connection, a rail connection that would go to Bali and from there to the world. With respect to the visitor center side of this thing, imagine a place where people could come, and the first thing they do is they come inside, they load up their iPhones or other media devices with all of the cultural attractions that they can visit, all the amenities of the Cape Fear region. And if they have an interest, they can also walk in and see a film produced by our local film community, drawing on the extraordinary history of this area. Those of you who've been to Williamsburg, for example, may have seen the filmmaking they call The Patriot, which describes that extraordinary period, an important period in their history. We have a history that goes back, as you well know, and I won't go into detail, well before the Revolutionary War. We have an interesting history in the Revolutionary War, certainly the Civil War, the development of the city is the largest in the state, and all of that. The not-so-good things that happened in 1898 that changed things here, and so on. Just all of that is the makings of a very, very interesting introduction to a city and to a region with a very attractive history. And having that kind of a place, tying it all together with a visitor center, seems to me to be a great asset for the community.
Thank you, Bill. All right, Dr. Keys.
This thought might not be fully formed since I must not be on the list here, but I just found out about the meeting earlier this afternoon. I work with an oceans conservation group, and I've only lived in town for about 3 months now, but the reason we came down here was we work a lot on offshore wind and renewable energy resources. And just last Wednesday, actually, was the first meeting of a task force of states, federal, local, tribal officials, actually looking at leases for offshore wind in the state of North Carolina, which has the best potential out of all East Coast states. And it was kind of a very hurried, or there wasn't a lot of announcement about the meeting. There weren't any public members involved. But I think it would be good for this group or individuals within this group to be a part of that process, because they're seriously looking at permitting sites. And obviously Wilmington is one of the larger ports, which would be heavily involved, and also in terms of transmission. So it would be something to consider and to make sure it's on the radar of this organization.
That's great. Thank you, Zach. Tom Conway?
Consider merging Wilmington and New Hanover County. The entities, the governmental entities we have, sometimes overlapping, sometimes competing, and yet, as was pointed out by Boyd, there's sometimes some gaps. And there are other cities, Indianapolis, Charleston, come to mind, that have had these kinds of mergers and have proven quite successful. And I think it would be something for the community, the region to consider.
Thank you, Tom.
Just as a point of order, I think we should either write each one down. If I want to come back and address something that was mentioned 3 times ago, I want to either have it on a piece of paper where I can see it, or be able to ask that question.
You want up on stickies, Scott.
Okay, good. Right. Okay,
Yeah.
okay. And so, can people ask questions? Do you think it's a good idea to ask, to sort of engage in these things as they go, or should we just document it?
Right now we're documenting it. We'll start
Okay.
grouping and get some topics, and then maybe see some similar topics that we can get around. Does that work? Alrighty. Stuart.
So, one of the things that struck me, being a relatively recent arrival to Wilmington, is that in the area, there are lots of different identities. There's Oak Island, and there are lots of towns with different ideas and pieces of it. And this organization has labeled itself as the Lower Cape Fear Regional Development. I mean, I wonder what that means, and I wonder what it would be to explore the idea regional identity for future growth. It's clearly a rapidly growing, rapidly developing area. Almost everybody I know has moved here in the last 10 years, excluding a couple of neighbors. And so it seems to me that to promote sustainable growth, sustainable development, you have to care about where you live. Caring about where you live, to me, it means having some sort of identity, and I think it's got to be at a level beyond an individual town. It's really got to be a region. What is the Lower Cape Fear? What does that mean? The Cape Fear Museum defines it as the 50-mile radius around Wilmington. Is that the best definition? Should we define it some other way? How do we grow that idea, that identity?
Stuart, I'm gonna take it to Ian. Ask for that.
Oh, okay, I am.
Yeah.
I work at IBM, and this is a sort of self-serving idea, but IBM is a sort of a grant for smarter cities. They're very excited about smarter cities. And the idea of smarter cities is that public officials and infrastructure, people who run the infrastructure, are engaged in this conversation about inefficiencies and where there are bottlenecks, and about where technology and efficiency can be applied, and they have a pool of money. And my idea is that Wilmington is sort of a good candidate for being a smarter city. Doesn't matter how smart you are to begin with, if you have infrastructural needs, and if you, especially, I think if you just want to bring people to the table, especially around, I mean, this is about traffic, it's about environment, it's about the way that people actually, workflow, actually how things are, loans are processed and how official functions are served. Then you apply, and you're given all this IBM tech and IBM expertise and a pile of money. And so whether you get the money or not, my idea is that if we simply applied to be a smarter city, it would force us, because of the application is a certain kind of application, to go have these meetings to convene the right people. You would have to go convene public officials, people who actually, engineers, and even that would be a victory, is my idea. And then maybe you would even become a smarter city to get this big pot of money that would be dog-eared just for use in improving infrastructure and functions, utilities, and so forth.
Okay, thank you, Ian. I'm going to call on Mike Giles.
Mike Giles, I'm with the Coastal Federation. In my story background, I've been a planner in several organizations and worked with Corps of Engineers as a biologist. I've done a lot of different things, and what I've seen is in a lot of communities, I've been around the block a few times, there's a lot of planning that goes on, but there's not a lot of education for our elected officials on how to make long-range decisions. A lot of long-range plans, a lot of great ideas, but they don't know how to implement or act on those plans. So I think some training and education, bring some folks in from Seattle, Portland, Cleveland, revamp our whole downtown and the waterfront. Bring some people in and educate our elected officials and our community on how to make long-range